At lunch, my son yelled, "You're worthless, Mom. Dad's new wife isn't." I stayed silent. A week later, when he saw my high school sweetheart's Bentley parked in front of my house, my phone rang 53 times. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I never thought my own son would be the one to finally break me. The words hit me like a physical blow across the restaurant table. "You're worthless, Mom. Dad's new wife isn't." Nolan's voice carried that particular brand of cruelty that only comes from someone who knows exactly where to aim the knife. The couple at the next table glanced over their conversation, faltering as they caught the venom in his tone. I sat there, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, a piece of grilled chicken growing cold as the silence stretched between us. The familiar tightness in my chest began to spread. That old companion that had lived with me for so many years. I'd forgotten what breathing freely felt like. At 63, I should have been used to disappointment. Lord knows I'd had enough practice. But this was different. This was my boy, my only child, the person I'd sacrificed everything for. "Did you hear me?" Nolan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his expensive shirt. Everything about him screamed success. Now the tailored suit, the confident posture, the way he'd demanded we meet at this upscale restaurant instead of my small kitchen like we used to. I said, "You're worthless." My hands trembled slightly as I set down my fork. The other diners continued their conversations, oblivious to the fact that my world was quietly crumbling at table 12. I forced myself to look at my son, really look at him. Look. When had his eyes become so cold? When had he learned to twist his mouth in that particular way that made every word sound like an insult? "I heard you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the clinking of dishes and muted restaurant chatter. Nolan rolled his eyes, the same gesture he'd made as a teenager when I'd asked him to clean his room or help with groceries. Michelle has a master's degree in business administration. She speaks 3 languages. She's helping Dad expand his practice into new markets. He ticked off each accomplishment on his fingers like he was reading from a resume. "What do you have?" "A high school diploma and 20 years of making sandwiches for other people's kids." The reference to my job at the elementary school cafeteria stung more than I expected. I'd been proud of that work. Proud of knowing which kids needed extra attention, which ones forgot their lunch money, which ones just needed someone to smile at them and ask about their day. But through Nolan's eyes, it was nothing. Less than nothing. "Your father and I divorced 15 years ago. I managed my voice still barely above a whisper. "Michelle has nothing to do with me. Everything has to do with you, Mom." Nolan leaned forward, his voice dropping low enough that only I could hear the poison in it. "Dad's happy now. Really happy. Michelle makes him laugh. She challenges him intellectually. She makes him feel alive. Each word was carefully chosen, precisely aimed. You made him feel trapped." I wanted to defend myself, to remind him of all the years I'd supported his father's medical practice, all the late nights I'd spent managing appointments and insurance claims while pregnant with him, all the dreams I'd set aside so his father could build his career. But what was the point? Nolan had already decided who was valuable and who wasn't. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, instead the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Nolan snorted. "You're not sorry. You're just pathetic. Do you know what Michelle said when she heard Dad was still sending you money every month? She said she couldn't understand why he was supporting someone who never contributed anything meaningful to his success." The words landed like physical blows. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white against the dark wood. Richard had been sending me $300 monthly since the divorce, not out of obligation, but because he'd said it was the right thing to do. I'd never asked for it, never expected it, but it had helped me keep my little house and maintain some dignity in my reduced circumstances. "She's right, you know," Nolan continued, oblivious to the fact that he was systematically destroying what was left of my heart. "Michelle thinks Dad should stop enabling your dependency. She says it's not healthy for anyone involved." I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. The restaurant buzzed around us, full of families and couples enjoying their meals, celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, sharing good news and making memories. None of them knew that a woman at table 12 was being erased one cruel word at a time by the person who was supposed to love her most. "I think she's right too," Nolan said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. It's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. You're 63 years old, Mom. Most people have accomplished something by now. I watched him eat this stranger who wore my son's face. When had he become so hard? When had kindness been bred out of him? I remembered the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares, who would bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers for the most beautiful mom in the world. That child was gone, replaced by this man who measured worth in dollars and degrees. I should go, I said, reaching for my purse. My hands were shaking badly now, and I hoped he wouldn't notice. You haven't finished your lunch? Nolan observed, not looking up from his plate. I've lost my appetite. He shrugged. Your choice. But Mom. He looked up then, and for a moment I thought I saw something softer in his expression. Hope fluttered weakly in my chest. Don't expect me to keep pretending that your feelings matter more than reality. Michelle has opened Dad's eyes to a lot of things. Maybe it's time someone opened yours. I stood on unsteady legs, fumbling with my coat. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. Thank you for lunch, I said automatically, the politeness ingrained from decades of swallowing hurts and maintaining appearances. Thank Michelle, Nolan replied, already checking his phone. She's the one who suggested I have this conversation with you. She thought it might help you understand your situation better. I walked out of that restaurant feeling like I was floating outside my own body. The late afternoon sun felt too bright after the dim interior, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, disoriented and fragile. People streamed past me, all of them seemingly sure of their destination, their purpose, their worth, as I drove home to my small house with its faded siding and overgrown garden. Nolan's words echoed in my mind. Worthless, pathetic dependency reality. Each word was a stone thrown at the fragile sense of self I'd built over the years since the divorce. But underneath the hurt, underneath the familiar shame, something else was stirring. Something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten its name. It felt dangerous and unfamiliar, like an ember that had been buried under ash for years, suddenly finding oxygen. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, watering her roses. She waved, and I managed a smile in return. Such a simple gesture, but it reminded me that somewhere in this world there were still people who saw me as human, who didn't measure my worth by my achievements or my bank account. I sat in my car for a long time after turning off the engine, letting the silence wash over me. Tomorrow I would wake up and go to work and smile at the children and pretend that nothing had changed. But something had changed. Something had shifted inside me during that terrible lunch. Something that might take time to fully emerge. For now, though, I just sat in my driveway and let myself feel the full weight of my son's rejection. Because sometimes before you can rise, you have to let yourself fall completely. And I was falling fast and hard towards something I couldn't yet name. The Bentley appeared on a Tuesday morning, gleaming silver against the modest backdrop of my neighborhood like a diamond dropped on concrete. I was washing dishes when I first noticed it through my kitchen window. The luxury sedan sat parked directly across from my house, its chrome catching the morning light in a way that made it impossible to ignore. In a neighborhood where the newest car was probably my 10-year-old Honda Civic, the Bentley stood out like a mansion among mobile homes. I dried my hands slowly, watching the car through the thin curtains I'd sewn myself 3 years ago. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but someone was definitely in there. The engine wasn't running, but I could see the faint outline of a figure in the driver's seat. My first thought was that they were lost. Rich people occasionally took wrong turns into our neighborhood, usually looking for the newer subdivision 2 miles east, where the houses had 3-car garages and manicured lawns. But lost people didn't sit still for 20 minutes, and this car hadn't moved since I'd first spotted it. I went about my morning routine, trying to ignore the persistent feeling that I was being watched. When I left for my shift at Roosevelt Elementary, the Bentley was still there. When I came home at 3:30, it was gone. But it came back the next day and the day after that. By Friday, I was starting to feel genuinely unsettled. The car appeared every morning around 8:15 and disappeared sometime in the afternoon. I tried to get a better look at the driver, but the tinted windows made it impossible. Mrs. Patterson from next door had noticed too. "You got yourself an admirer, Velma," she'd asked while we both collected our mail. Her tone was joking, but I could see the concern in her weathered face. I don't know what it is, I'd admitted. Probably just someone using our street to make phone calls or something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. There was something deliberate about the way the car positioned itself directly across from my house. Something intentional about the timing. The weekend passed quietly with no sign of the mysterious Bentley. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, that my recently shattered nerves were playing tricks on me. Nolan's words from the restaurant still echoed in my mind at odd moments, catching me off guard when I was folding laundry or watching the evening news. Worthless. The word had taken up residence in my brain, repeating itself like a broken record. Monday morning brought the car back. This time, I was ready. I'd positioned myself at the front window with a cup of coffee, determined to get a better look at whoever was inside. But before I could focus properly on the driver, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Boston area code. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Velma. Velma Morrison." The voice was male, older, with a slight tremor that spoke of advanced years. "Yes, this is Velma." "Oh my goodness." The voice broke slightly. "I can't believe I finally found you." I frowned, gripping the phone tighter. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" "This is Thomas Gardner." "Tommy Gardner. We went to high school together, class of '78. I sat behind you in Mrs. Henderson's chemistry class." The name hit me like a physical shock. Tommy Gardner. Sweet, quiet Tommy with his thick glasses and gentle smile. The boy who'd helped me with my chemistry homework and walked me to the bus stop when David Brennan was bothering me. I hadn't thought about him in decades. "Tommy," I whispered, sinking into my kitchen chair. "How did you find me?" "It took some doing," he admitted with a small laugh. "I hired a private investigator. Cost me more than I care to admit, but I had to try." A private investigator. The word sent a chill down my spine. "Why were you looking for me?" There was a pause long enough that I wondered if the connection had been lost. Then Tommy spoke again, his voice softer now. "Velma, I have something important to tell you. Something about Marcus." Marcus. The name hit me like a lightning bolt, awakening memories. I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself they were dreams. Marcus Reed with his dark hair and blue eyes, and the way he could make me laugh until my sides hurt. Marcus, who'd been my first love, my first heartbreak, my first taste of what it felt like to be truly cherished by someone. "What about Marcus?" I managed, my voice barely audible. "He's been looking for you, Velma, for years, decades, actually." He never stopped. I felt the room spin around me. Marcus looking for me. It didn't make sense. We'd been teenagers, just kids playing at love. That was 45 years ago. People moved on. People forgot. "That's impossible," I whispered. "It's not," Tommy said gently. "Velma Marcus Reed is one of the wealthiest men in New England now. He built a business empire worth billions, but he never married, never had children. He spent a fortune over the years trying to find you." Through my kitchen window, I could see the Bentley still parked across the street. Understanding began to dawn, slow and disbelieving. "Is that him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "In the car outside my house." "Yes," Tommy confirmed. "He didn't want to just show up at your door. He was afraid of scaring you. He asked me to call first to prepare you." My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. "This can't be real." "It is real, Velma. He's been waiting 45 years to see you again." I closed my eyes, memories flooding back with devastating clarity. Marcus at 17, tall and lean, with calloused hands from working construction after school to help support his family. Marcus teaching me to drive in his beat-up Chevelle in the empty parking lot behind the grocery store. Marcus promising me that someday, when we were both older and established, we'd get married and travel the world together. But life had gotten in the way, as life always does. My parents had moved me across the country the summer after graduation for my father's job. There had been no Facebook then, no easy way to stay in touch. Letters had been exchanged for a few months, but distance and time, and the general chaos of being 18, had eventually won. I'd met Richard in college, gotten married, had Nolan built what I'd thought was a good life, and Marcus had become a memory, albeit a cherished one. "Why now?" I asked. Why, after all these years? Tommy's voice grew softer. His health isn't good, Velma. The doctors say he has maybe a year, 18 months at the outside. He's been putting his affairs in order. And he said he couldn't die without seeing you one more time, without telling you something important. My throat felt tight. What does he want to tell me? That's between you and him. But Velma, he wants to offer you something. Something that could change your life completely. I looked out the window at the Bentley again. This time seeing it not as a threat, but as a bridge to a past I'd thought was lost forever. Inside that car sat someone who had known me when I was young and full of dreams. Someone who had seen potential in me that I'd forgotten I ever possessed. "What should I do?" I whispered. "That's up to you," Tommy said. "But I will say this, I've never seen a man more desperate to make things right. Whatever he has to offer you, it comes from a place of genuine love, the kind of love that doesn't fade." Even after 45 years after I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring out at the Bentley. My mind raced with possibilities, with questions, with memories I'd kept locked away for decades. Marcus Reed, a billionaire. Marcus Reed looking for me. Marcus Reed sitting in a car outside my house, waiting for permission to re-enter my life. Just 7 days ago, my own son had called me worthless, had told me I'd never contributed anything meaningful to anyone's life, had made me feel smaller than I'd ever felt before. And now this. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my simple cotton dress, running my fingers through my graying hair. In the mirror by my front door, I caught a glimpse of myself, a 63-year-old woman with laugh lines and worry lines, with hands roughened by decades of work and a heart that had learned to expect disappointment. But for the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt something stirring inside me that I'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. As I reached for the door handle, my phone rang again. The same Boston number. "Velma." Tommy's voice was urgent now. "There's something else you should know before you go out there. What your phone is about to start ringing a lot. Marcus had to tell some people he was coming to see you. People who've been involved in looking for you. Word has gotten out." "What do you mean?" "I mean your quiet life is about to get very complicated, very quickly." As if summoned by his words, my phone began to ring again immediately after I hung up, then again and again. And by the time I finally worked up the courage to walk outside and approach the Bentley, my phone had rung 53 times. My legs felt unsteady as I walked across the street toward the Bentley, each step carrying me further from the safety of my small world and closer to something I couldn't yet comprehend. The morning air was crisp against my face, but I barely felt it. All I could focus on was the dark silhouette behind the wheel, a figure from my past who had somehow found his way back into my present. The driver's door opened before I reached the car. Marcus Reed stepped out slowly, and I felt the breath leave my lungs in a rush. 45 years had passed since I'd last seen him, but I would have recognized him anywhere. His dark hair was now silver white, combed back from a face that had grown distinguished with age. The lean teenager I'd known had filled out into a man of substance, his expensive suit fitting perfectly over broad shoulders. But his eyes, those impossibly blue eyes that had haunted my dreams for decades, were exactly the same. "Hello, Velma," he said softly, his voice deeper now, but carrying the same gentle tone that had once made me feel like the most important person in the world. I opened my mouth to speak, but found no words. This couldn't be real. Men like Marcus Reed, billionaire businessmen who commanded empires, didn't drive themselves to modest neighborhoods to reconnect with their high school sweethearts. This had to be some kind of dream, the product of a mind pushed too far by recent humiliations. "You look beautiful," Marcus continued, taking a tentative step closer. "You haven't changed at all." That broke the spell. I let out a shaky laugh, suddenly aware of my worn jeans and faded sweater, of the gray streaking through my brown hair and the lines that mapped the years around my eyes. "Marcus, I'm 63 years old. I've changed plenty." He smiled then, the same crooked grin that had made my teenage heart skip beats. "Not where it matters." My phone buzzed in my pocket. The 54th call, probably. I ignored it, unable to look away from the man standing before me. "Tommy said, 'You've been looking for me for 27 years, Marcus admitted. "Ever since I had enough money to hire the kind of investigators who could track down someone who didn't want to be found." I wasn't hiding, I protested. Weren't you? His expression grew gentle, but knowing you kept your married name after the divorce, you moved to a different state, you don't have social media accounts under your real name. It took my people 8 years just to confirm you were still alive. The weight of what he was saying settled over me. While I'd been living my quiet life raising Nolan, working at the school cafeteria, struggling through a difficult marriage and an even more difficult divorce, Marcus had been searching for me. Building a fortune. Yes, but also spending part of that fortune trying to find the girl he'd loved when we were both 17. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying my face as if memorizing every detail. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of years of regret, of things left unsaid. Because you were the only person who ever made me feel like I could be more than what I was born to be. Because I never stopped loving you, and because I made you a promise 45 years ago that I never got to keep the promise. My heart clenched as the memory surfaced as clear and painful as if it had happened yesterday. We'd been sitting by the lake on our last night together before my family moved to California. Marcus had taken my hands in his young face serious in the moonlight. I'm going to make something of myself, Velma, he'd said. I'm going to build something real, something lasting, and when I do, I'm going to find you, and I'm going to give you the world. I'd kissed him then, tasting salt from my own tears, believing with all the fierce certainty of first love that somehow, some way we'd find our way back to each other. But life had other plans. You kept that promise, I said, now my voice thick with emotion. Look at what you built. Tommy told me about your business empire. Marcus shook his head. I built the empire, yes, but I never gave you the world. I never even got the chance to try. My phone buzzed again. Then again, Marcus glanced at it with a wrathful expression. That would be the consequences of my search for you, he said. When you've been looking for someone for decades and you finally find them, word tends to get out. Lawyers, business associates, old friends who helped in the search. They all know I'm here. What do they want? Some of them want to meet the woman who inspired Marcus Reed to spend millions of dollars on private investigators. Others want to make sure you're not some kind of con artist who's going to take advantage of a sick old man. The words sick old man hit me like a physical blow. Tommy said your health pancreatic cancer, Marcus said matter-of-factly. Stage 4. The doctors give me 12 to 18 months, maybe less. I felt tears spring to my eyes before I could stop them. Marcus, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry for me, he said firmly. I've lived more life in 63 years than most people manage in a century. I've built companies, traveled the world, helped thousands of people through my charitable foundations. The only thing I regret is the time I lost with you. The weight of his words settled over me like a blanket. Here was a man who had everything, wealth, power, influence, and he was telling me that I was what he regretted losing most. But that's why I'm here, Marcus continued. I want to offer you something, Velma, something that could change your life completely. My heart began to race. What kind of something? Marcus walked around to the passenger side of the Bentley and opened the door. Get in. There's something I need to show you. I hesitated. Getting into that car felt like crossing a threshold. I couldn't uncross. My quiet, predictable life, the life my son had called worthless just a week ago, would never be the same. But then I thought about Nolan's words about the way he'd looked at me across that restaurant table, like I was something distasteful he couldn't wait to be rid of. About Michelle, the new wife who spoke 3 languages and had convinced my ex-husband to question whether supporting me was enabling my dependency. About all the years I'd made myself small, made myself quiet, made myself grateful for scraps of attention and affection. I got into the Bentley. The interior was even more luxurious than I'd expected. Soft leather seats, gleaming wood-trimmed technology I couldn't begin to understand. But Marcus seemed oblivious to the opulence surrounding him. His attention was entirely focused on a manila folder he pulled from his briefcase. I want to show you something, he said, opening the folder. These are the financial statements for the Velma Morrison Foundation for Educational Excellence. I stared at him blankly. The what? A charitable foundation I established 12 years ago. It provides scholarships for underprivileged children, funds school lunch programs, and supports educational initiatives in underserved communities. Marcus handed me a thick document filled with numbers that made my head spin. It's currently worth $47 million and growing. I couldn't process what I was seeing. Why is it called the Velma Morrison Foundation? Marcus smiled that crooked grin again. Because you inspired it. Do you remember what you used to say in high school about how every child deserved to feel special, to feel valued, to have someone believe in their potential? I did remember. It had been my dream back then to work with children who needed extra support, to be the kind of adult who could make a difference in a young life. But dreams had a way of getting buried under the weight of practical necessities. I remembered Marcus continued, and when I had the money to act on it, I created a foundation based on your values, your vision. But Velma, I need someone to run it. Someone who understands children, who has experience working in schools, who shares the foundation's mission. The implications of what he was saying began to sink in. You want me to run your foundation? I want you to be the executive director. Full salary benefits, unlimited budget for programs you believe in. You'd have complete autonomy to implement your vision for helping children. Marcus leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. The salary is $200,000 annually, plus performance bonuses. The foundation also comes with a house, a beautiful place in Connecticut where you could live and work. $200,000. The number was so far beyond my experience that I couldn't even process it properly. I'd been making $18,000 a year at the cafeteria, and that had seemed adequate for my simple needs. Marcus, this is insane. I'm not qualified to run a multi-million-dollar foundation. I don't have a business degree or nonprofit experience. Or you have something better, he interrupted. You have heart. You have integrity. You understand what it's like to feel undervalued, overlooked, dismissed. That gives you something no MBA program can teach. I shook my head, overwhelmed. This is too much. It's too big. I can't. Yes, you can. Marcus reached over and took my hands in his, the same gesture he'd made by the lake all those years ago. Velma, you've spent 45 years making yourself smaller than you are. You've let other people define your worth, determine your value. But I see who you really are. I've always seen it. Tears were flowing freely now, years of suppressed dreams and buried hopes rising to the surface. What if I fail? What if you soar? Marcus countered. What if you finally get to be the person you were always meant to be? My phone buzzed again in my pocket, but for the first time in days, I didn't feel the familiar spike of anxiety. Whether it was another reporter or another business associate, or even Nolan calling to deliver another dose of casual cruelty, it didn't matter. For the first time in decades, I had options. For the first time in my life, I had power. The house Marcus showed me 2 days later took my breath away. It wasn't a mansion, nothing ostentatious or intimidating, but it was more beautiful than any place I'd ever imagined living. The foundation's headquarters sat on 5 acres of rolling Connecticut, a restored 19th century farmhouse with gleaming hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a wraparound porch that overlooked gardens that seemed to stretch forever. The previous owner was an artist, Marcus explained, as we walked through rooms filled with natural light and carefully preserved architectural details. She left it to the foundation when she died. I thought you might appreciate the history, the character. I ran my fingers along a built-in bookshelf that probably cost more than my current house was worth. Marcus, this is incredible, but I still don't understand why you're offering this to me. He stopped walking and turned to face me fully. We were standing in what would be my office, a sun-drenched room with French doors opening onto the garden. Do you remember the night before you moved away? What we talked about besides our promises to find each other? I did remember. We'd sat by that lake for hours talking about everything and nothing, trying to stretch our last night together into infinity. We talked about our dreams, what we wanted to do with our lives. You said you wanted to work with children who were forgotten kids, who didn't have advocates, who fell through the cracks of the system. You said you wanted to create programs that would make sure no child ever felt worthless or invisible. The memory was vivid now, painful in its clarity. I was 17, Marcus. I was full of idealistic dreams that had no basis in reality. Were they idealistic or were they prophetic? Marcus walked to the window, gazing out at the gardens. Do you know what I found when I researched your work history? You spent 23 years working in school cafeterias, but that wasn't all you did. You started a weekend backpack program to make sure kids had food over weekends. You organized clothing drives for students who needed winter coats. You created a quiet space in the cafeteria for children who were being bullied. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Those weren't official programs. I just saw needs and tried to meet them. Exactly. Marcus turned back to me, his expression intense. You saw needs and met them without funding, without administrative support, without recognition. You did exactly what you said you wanted to do when we were teenagers. You became an advocate for forgotten children. The truth of what he was saying settled over me slowly. I had done those things, had fought small battles for vulnerable kids whenever I could, but I'd never seen it as significant. Never thought of it as real work. It was just what felt right. But running a foundation is different, I protested. There are budgets and boards of directors and legal requirements, all of which can be handled by staff. Marcus interrupted. I'm not asking you to become a corporate executive overnight, Velma. I'm asking you to do what you've always done, but with unlimited resources and the authority to make real changes. He walked to an antique desk and pulled out another folder, this one even thicker than the first. These are the Foundation's current programs. Scholarship funds for low-income students, meal programs for schools in underserved areas, supplies for teachers in underfunded districts. It's good work, but it's unfocused. It needs someone with vision to tie it all together, to expand it into something transformative. I opened the folder and began reading, my pulse quickening as I took in the scope of what the Foundation was already accomplishing. Last year alone, they'd provided scholarships to 800 students, funded school lunch programs in 47 districts, and supplied classroom materials to over 2,000 teachers. This is incredible, I murmured, turning pages filled with testimonials from students and teachers whose lives had been changed by the Foundation's work. It's a start, Marcus said, but imagine what it could become with someone who truly understands the needs these programs address, someone who's lived the reality of working within underfunded school systems. A testimonial from a high school senior caught my eye. She wrote about receiving a Foundation scholarship that allowed her to attend college, becoming the first person in her family to pursue higher education. Her gratitude was raw and genuine, her determination to pay the opportunity forward evident in every line. I thought about my own childhood, about being the daughter of parents who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, who couldn't afford the extras that might have opened doors for me, about the college dreams I'd deferred when I got married young, the career aspirations I'd set aside to support Richard's medical practice and raise Nolan. What would you need from me? I asked quietly. Marcus smiled, and I saw relief flicker across his features. Your acceptance. Your willingness to learn what you need to learn, your commitment to being the advocate you've always been, just on a much larger scale. I closed the folder and looked around the beautiful office again. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like possibilities. The salary you mentioned, $200,000 annually plus bonuses based on program performance, full health benefits, retirement contributions, housing allowance if you choose to live elsewhere. Though this house comes with the position if you want it, $200,000 more money than I'd made in the last 12 years combined. Enough to never worry about utilities or car repairs or whether I could afford to replace my worn-out furniture. Enough to hold my head up when my son made his cruel comparisons, to know that my worth wasn't measured by my ex-husband's monthly charity payments. There's a staff, I asked. A full administrative team, program coordinators, financial officers, legal counsel. Your job would be to set the vision and direction. They'd handle the implementation. I walked to the French doors and stepped out onto a small balcony that overlooked the gardens. The air smelled of late roses and autumn leaves, clean and hopeful. I could picture myself here working in this beautiful space, making decisions that could change children's lives for the better. But doubt crept in, familiar and persistent. Marcus, what if I'm not who you think I am? What if I disappoint you? He joined me on the balcony, standing close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. You could never disappoint me, Velma. But even if you could, what's the alternative? Going back to a job that pays $18,000 a year, staying in a life where your own son calls you worthless. The words stung, but they also clarified something important. This wasn't just about the money or the prestige or even the opportunity to do meaningful work. This was about choosing to see myself as Marcus saw me, as someone capable of more than I'd ever dared to imagine. "There's something else," Marcus said softly. "Something personal I need you to know." I turned to face him, noting the suddenly serious expression on his face. "I meant what I said about loving you all these years, about never marrying anyone else because no one could measure up to what we had." His voice grew quieter. "But I'm not offering you this position because of our past relationship. I'm offering it because you're the right person for the job. And I need you to know that if you accept, there are no romantic expectations, no strings attached. This is about professional opportunity, not personal manipulation." The honesty of his statement, the careful way he'd addressed the elephant in the room, only reinforced my growing sense that this was real. That Marcus Reed, billionaire businessman, genuinely wanted to give me the chance to become everything I'd once dreamed of being. "When would you need an answer?" I asked. "Take as much time as you need, but Velma—" He touched my arm gently. "Don't let fear make the decision for you. You've been afraid for too long." That evening I sat in my small kitchen with a cup of tea, staring at the business card Marcus had given me. It was simple, elegant, just his name, title, and contact information embossed on heavy cream-colored stock. The kind of business card that commanded respect, that opened doors, that meant something in the world. My phone had finally stopped ringing. The 53 calls had turned into nearly 100 before I'd finally turned it off. Overwhelmed by reporters wanting quotes and business associates demanding meetings, and people I'd never heard of claiming to know me from decades ago. But in the quiet of my kitchen, with my familiar surroundings and my simple life spread out around me, I could think clearly for the first time in days. This was my choice, not my parents' choice, or my ex-husband's choice, or my son's choice. Mine. I could stay here in this small house with its worn furniture and fading wallpaper, working at the school cafeteria until I was too old to stand on my feet for 8 hours a day. I could continue to make myself small, to accept my son's assessment of my worth, to live on the margins of other people's lives. Or I could step into the life Marcus was offering me. I could become the executive director of a multi-million-dollar foundation responsible for programs that could change thousands of children's lives. I could live in that beautiful house, work in that sun-filled office, use my voice to advocate for the vulnerable and forgotten. I could finally, after 63 years, discover what I was truly capable of. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus's number. "I accept," I said when he answered. And for the first time in decades, I felt like I was finally coming home. 3 months into my new life, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. It wasn't just the clothes, though. The tailored suits Marcus's personal shopper had helped me select were a far cry from the discount store outfits I'd worn to the school cafeteria. It wasn't even the house, though. Waking up each morning in the restored farmhouse still felt like a dream I might wake up from at any moment. It was something deeper, something in my posture, in the way I held my head, in the confidence that had slowly begun to replace the apologetic hunch I'd carried for decades. I looked like a woman who mattered. For the first time in my life, I felt like one too. The foundation work had proven to be everything Marcus promised, and more. My first week, I'd sat in meetings with program coordinators and grant administrators, overwhelmed by budgets and compliance requirements and strategic planning documents that might as well have been written in a foreign language. But slowly, with the patient help of my staff, I began to understand the scope of what we could accomplish. The breakthrough came during my 3rd week, when I visited Jefferson Elementary in Hartford. The school served one of the city's poorest neighborhoods, and our foundation had been providing lunch program funding for 2 years. But walking through those hallways, talking to teachers and administrators, I saw needs that no amount of money could address if we didn't change our approach. "The kids arrive hungry," Principal Martinez told me as we stood in the cafeteria during the breakfast service. "But they're also arriving hurt, angry, scared. Food helps, but it's not enough." I watched a little girl, maybe 7 years old, sit alone at a corner table, methodically eating her cereal without making eye contact with anyone. Something about her posture, The careful way she made herself small, invisible, pierced my heart. "What's her story?" I asked quietly. "Sarah. Her mom works 3 jobs, leaves for the first one at 4 in the morning. Sarah gets herself up, gets dressed, walks 6 blocks to school alone. She's never late, never complains, but she hardly speaks to anyone." I approached Sarah's table, slowly crouching down to her eye level. "Hi there, I'm Mrs. Morrison. That's a pretty backpack you have." Sarah looked up briefly, gave a tiny nod, then returned her attention to her cereal. "I used to work in a school cafeteria," I continued. "I met a lot of kids who were really responsible like you. Kids who took care of themselves and did important grown-up things." This time, Sarah's eyes stayed on my face a little longer. Sometimes those kids felt like they had to be grown up all the time. But you know what? Even the most responsible kids deserve to feel special, deserve to have someone notice how hard they're working. Sarah set down her spoon. "My mom says I'm her helper. I bet you're a wonderful helper. But you're also just Sarah, and Sarah deserves to be taken care of too." That conversation changed everything. I went back to the foundation offices with a new vision, one that went beyond funding existing programs to creating something entirely different. We wouldn't just feed children. We'd create comprehensive support systems that addressed their emotional and social needs alongside their physical ones. Within 6 weeks, I'd restructured our approach entirely. The Velma Morrison Foundation became the first educational charity to integrate mental health support mentorship programs and family services into its mission. Instead of simply writing checks to existing programs, we created new models that other foundations began studying and replicating. The work was challenging, demanding, and more fulfilling than anything I'd ever done. I found myself working 12-hour days, not because I had to, but because I couldn't bear to stop. Every success story like Sarah, who was now part of our new mentorship program and had blossomed into a talkative, confident child, felt like a validation of everything I'd dreamed of accomplishing. But the most satisfying part wasn't the professional recognition or the growing media attention our innovative programs were receiving. It was the slow, steady rebuilding of my sense of self-worth. Every morning when I walked into my sun-filled office, every meeting where my opinion was not just heard, but sought after, every decision I made that would impact thousands of children, all of it contributed to a growing certainty that I was exactly where I belonged, which made Nolan's sudden reappearance all the more jarring. I was reviewing grant applications in my office on a Tuesday afternoon when my assistant knocked on my door. Margaret was a competent woman in her 40s who managed my schedule with military precision and had never once looked flustered in the 3 months I'd known her. Today she looked flustered. "Mrs. Morrison, there's a young man here who insists on seeing you. He says he's your son, but he's not on your approved visitor list, and he's being quite persistent." My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard from Nolan since that awful lunch 3.5 months ago. Part of me had hoped he'd simply forgotten about me, moved on with his successful life and his father's new family. But deep down, I'd known this moment would come. "Send him in," I said, setting down my pen and straightening my shoulders. Nolan entered my office like a man surveying territory he intended to conquer. His expensive suit and confident stride were familiar, but something in his expression was different, less certain, perhaps more calculating. "Well," he said, stopping in front of my desk and looking around the elegant office with undisguised amazement. "This is quite an upgrade from the school cafeteria." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Hello, Nolan. Please sit down." He remained standing, his eyes continuing to roam over the antique furniture, the oil paintings, the floor, to ceiling windows that looked out over the manicured gardens. "So it's true then. All those news articles about the mysterious woman who suddenly appeared to run some billionaire's foundation. They're about you. They're about my work. Yes, your work." Nolan let out a short laugh. "Mom, 3 months ago you were serving mashed potatoes to elementary school kids. Now you're running a $47 million foundation and living in a house that's bigger than Dad's entire medical practice." I leaned back in my chair, studying my son's face. The arrogance was still there, but underneath it I detected something I'd never seen before. Uncertainty. Maybe even a touch of fear. "Is there something you need, Nolan?" He finally sat down, but his posture remained tense. "I need to understand what's happening here." How does someone like you suddenly end up in a position like this? Someone like you. The phrase stung, but not in the devastating way it would have 4 months ago. Now it mostly made me sad for him, for the narrowness of his worldview, for his inability to see beyond the surface of things. Someone like me, I repeated carefully. What exactly do you mean by that? Nolan shifted in his chair. You know what I mean, Mom. You're not educated, you don't have business experience. You've never managed anything more complex than a school lunch program. And yet, here I am, I said calmly, managing a multi-million-dollar foundation that's expanded its programs by 60% in 3 months, overseeing a staff of 27 people making decisions that affect thousands of children across 6 states. I watched him process this information, saw the moment when he realized that his assessment of my capabilities might have been somewhat off the mark. But how? He pressed. How did this happen? I could have told him about Marcus, about our shared history, about the love that had endured across decades. I could have explained about the years of quiet advocacy work he'd dismissed as meaningless, about the skills I'd developed that he'd never bothered to notice. Instead, I simply said I was offered an opportunity, and I took it. Just like that. Just like that. Nolan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on a framed photo on my desk, a picture of me with a group of scholarship recipients at our annual awards ceremony. In the photo, I was smiling broadly, surrounded by beaming teenagers who represented the future our programs were helping to create. You look different, he said finally. Do I? Happy, confident like. He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words. Like someone who matters, I suggested gently. He flinched. Mom, about what I said at lunch, I was angry. Dad and Michelle were putting pressure on me to talk to you about the money situation, and I handled it badly. The money situation. Nolan's jaw tightened. Dad's practice isn't doing as well as he'd hoped. Michelle's spending habits are more expensive than he anticipated. They thought maybe you could be convinced to refuse the support payments, help them save money. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. They'd sent my son to humiliate me, not out of genuine concern for my character development, but to manipulate me into making their lives easier. And now? I asked. Now everything's different. Nolan leaned forward, his voice taking on a tone I recognized. The same wheedling, manipulative cadence he'd used as a child when he wanted something. Mom, you're obviously doing incredibly well, better than any of us imagined you could do, and I'm proud of you. I really am. I waited. There was more coming. But I'm also worried about you, he continued. This is all so sudden, so dramatic. I want to make sure you're not being taken advantage of, that you have family looking out for your interests. Family, I repeated. Yes, I know I haven't been the best son lately, but I want to do better. I want to be involved in your life, help you navigate this new world you're in. His voice grew more earnest. These wealthy people, Mom, they can be manipulative. They might seem generous, but they usually want something in return. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where the last roses of the season were still blooming. Behind me, I could hear Nolan's breathing, could feel his tension as he waited for my response. You're right about one thing, I said, finally turning back to face him. People can be manipulative. They can use others for their own benefit, then discard them when they're no longer useful. Nolan nodded eagerly. Exactly. That's why you need family around you. People who care about you for who you are, not what you can do for them. I walked back to my desk and sat down, meeting his eyes directly. Tell me, Nolan, in the 4 months since you told me I was worthless, how many times have you called to check on me? How many times have you asked about my well-being or my happiness? The color drained from his face. The answer is 0, I continued. You didn't call when I resigned from the cafeteria job. You didn't call when I moved out of my house. You didn't call when news stories about my new position started appearing in the papers. The only reason you're here now is because you've realized that the worthless mother you dismissed might actually have something valuable to offer. Mom, that's not fair, isn't it? I leaned forward. For 34 years, I made you the center of my world. I sacrificed my education, my career aspirations, my personal happiness to ensure that you had everything you needed. And the moment you decided I was no longer useful to you, you threw me away like garbage." Tears were gathering in my eyes, but my voice remained steady. "So forgive me if I'm skeptical about your sudden concern for my welfare. Forgive me if I don't immediately welcome you back into my life just because my circumstances have changed." Nolan sat in stunned silence, his face pale and his hands clenched in his lap. "I think you should go," I said quietly. He stood slowly. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. At the door, he turned back one more time. "Mom, I know I messed up, but I'm still your son." I looked at him for a long moment. This man who shared my DNA, but had become a stranger to me through his own choices. "Yes," I said finally, "you are. But being my son is a relationship that requires more than biology, Nolan. It requires respect. And until you can find that, I think it's better if we don't see each other." After he left, I sat alone in my office as the afternoon light faded into evening. For the first time since accepting Marcus's offer, I felt the full weight of what I'd gained and what I'd lost. But I also felt something else, the quiet strength that comes from finally knowing your own worth. 1 year later, I stood in the ballroom of the Hartford Marriott watching 500 of the most influential people in Connecticut celebrate the Velma Morrison Foundation's unprecedented achievements. The annual gala had grown from a modest fundraiser to the premier charitable event of the social season. And tonight, we were announcing the largest single grant in the foundation's history. $15 million to establish comprehensive support centers in 20 underserved schools across New England. I adjusted the silk evening gown Marcus had insisted on buying for me. A deep sapphire blue that brought out my eyes and made me feel like royalty. The woman who had once considered a $30 dress from Walmart a luxury was now wearing a designer creation worth more than she used to make in 6 months. And somehow, it felt perfectly natural. "You look radiant," Marcus said, appearing at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. His health had deteriorated over the past year, but he'd insisted on attending tonight despite his doctor's concerns. The cancer was winning its battle, but Marcus Reed was still fighting with everything he had. "I feel radiant," I admitted, accepting the champagne. A year ago, I would never have imagined I could feel comfortable in a room like this. "A year ago, you hadn't yet remembered who you really are," Marcus replied, his eyes warm with pride and something deeper. Over the months, our professional relationship had gradually evolved into something more personal. Though we'd both been careful not to rush anything, we were no longer 17, and we both understood that some things were worth savoring. The evening's program began with a video presentation showcasing the foundation's impact over the past year. I watched from the wings as footage played of children we'd helped. Sarah from Jefferson Elementary, now confident and thriving in our mentorship program. Miguel, a high school senior, whose scholarship would make him the first in his family to attend college. Dozens of other young faces representing hope and possibility. When my name was announced and I stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. A year ago, the thought of speaking in front of 500 people would have paralyzed me with terror. Tonight, it felt like coming home. When I was a child, I began my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. I dreamed of making a difference in the lives of young people who felt forgotten, overlooked, or dismissed. Like many childhood dreams, it seemed destined to remain just that, a dream. I found Marcus in the audience, saw his encouraging smile, and felt my confidence strengthen. But dreams have a way of finding us when we're finally ready to embrace them. This foundation has taught me that it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. That worth isn't measured by others' opinions or circumstances, but by the impact we choose to make in the world. The speech continued for 20 minutes, touching on our programs, our successes, and our plans for expansion. But the heart of it was simpler, that every person, regardless of age or background, deserves to feel valued and capable of extraordinary things. As I concluded and returned to thunderous applause, I spotted a familiar figure near the back of the ballroom. Nolan stood partially hidden behind a column, his expression unreadable. He was alone, no sign of Richard or Michelle, and something about his posture suggested he'd been there for some time. I made my way through the crowd of well-wishers and donors, accepting congratulations and promising follow-up meetings, but my attention remained fixed on my son. He waited until I approached before stepping fully into view. "Hello, Mom. Nolan." I studied his face, noting the changes a year had wrought. He looked older, more subdued. The arrogant confidence that had once defined him had been replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. "I didn't know you were coming. I bought a ticket at the last minute. I've been following your work in the newspapers." He gestured toward the stage where my picture was still displayed on the large screen. "You were incredible up there." "Thank you." We stood in awkward silence for a moment, the noise of the celebration swirling around us. Finally, Nolan spoke again. "I owe you an apology, a real one this time." I waited, not making it easier for him. "I was wrong about everything." He continued, his voice thick with emotion. "About you, about your worth, about what you were capable of. I was so focused on measuring success by conventional standards that I couldn't see the extraordinary person you've always been." "What changed?" I asked quietly. Nolan glanced around the elegant ballroom, taking in the displays showcasing our programs, the photos of children whose lives had been transformed by our work, the evidence of impact that surrounded us, watching what you built, reading about the kids you've helped, understanding that in 1 year you accomplished more meaningful change than I have in my entire career. His voice cracked slightly, realizing that when I called you worthless, I was describing myself. The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was quite ready to cross. "I've made some changes in my life," Nolan continued. "I left my job at the consulting firm. I'm working for a nonprofit now, helping small businesses in underserved communities access capital. It doesn't pay nearly as well, but it feels important in ways I never experienced before." I felt a flicker of surprise, then something warmer. "What prompted that change?" "You did. Seeing you find your true calling made me realize I'd never found mine. I'd been so busy climbing ladders that I never stopped to ask if they were leaning against the right walls." A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne, and Nolan accepted a glass with shaking hands. "I also ended things with Michelle," he said quietly, "and I've been seeing a therapist trying to understand how I became someone who could be so cruel to the person who loved me most." This admission surprised me even more. "What did you discover?" Nolan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his champagne glass. "That I learned to measure worth the way Dad did, by income and status and external validation. That I was terrified of being ordinary. So I convinced myself that anyone who lived an ordinary life was somehow less valuable." He looked up at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears, including my own mother. "And now I understand that there's nothing ordinary about kindness, nothing common about spending decades caring for others, advocating for the vulnerable, making sacrifices so other people could thrive." His voice grew stronger. "You were never worthless, Mom. You were the most valuable person in my life, and I was too blind and selfish to see it." I felt tears gathering in my own eyes, but I wasn't ready to let go of the hurt completely. "Not yet. I appreciate your apology, Nolan. I do. But words are easy. The real question is whether you can sustain this new understanding when life gets complicated again. I know I have to earn your trust back," he said quickly. "I know one conversation can't undo years of taking you for granted, but Mom, if you'll let me, I'd like to try. I'd like to be the son you deserved all along." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my side, his keen eyes taking in the emotional scene between Nolan and me. "Marcus," I said, composing myself quickly, "I'd like you to meet my son, Nolan." "Nolan, this is Marcus Reed." The two men shook hands, Nolan's expression respectful and perhaps slightly odd. Marcus studied him with the same intensity he brought to all his business dealings. "Your mother speaks about you often," Marcus said diplomatically. "She has every reason to speak badly of me," Nolan replied with surprising honesty. "I haven't been the son she deserved, but I'm hoping to change that if she'll give me the chance." Marcus glanced at me, his expression questioning. I gave a small nod, and his features relaxed slightly. Second chances are rare gifts, Marcus said. I hope you understand how precious they are. I do. Nolan said, his gaze shifting between Marcus and me. More than you know. The evening continued around us, but the three of us remained in our small circle, navigating the delicate terrain of forgiveness and new beginnings. Eventually, Marcus excused himself to speak with major donors, leaving Nolan and me alone again. He loves you, Nolan observed. It's obvious in the way he looks at you. We have a complicated history, I said carefully, but a hopeful future. I smiled, thinking of the ring Marcus had shown me the week before, a simple, elegant solitaire that had belonged to his grandmother. He hadn't proposed yet, was waiting for my signal that I was ready for that conversation, but the possibility hung between us like a promise. I think so, I said. Nolan nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box. I brought you something. It's not much, but I thought. He trailed off suddenly, uncertain. I accepted the box and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a simple silver locket, obviously vintage, with intricate engraving on the front. I opened it to find two pictures. One of me holding newborn Nolan in the hospital, both of us looking exhausted but happy, and another of us at his high school graduation, my face glowing with pride. I found these in some old photo albums, Nolan explained. Looking at them, I remembered something I'd forgotten. How much you loved me. How proud you always were, even when I didn't deserve it. His voice grew thick with emotion. I wanted you to have them so you'd remember too, in case you decide I'm worth forgiveness. I held the locket carefully, feeling the weight of all those years of love and sacrifice and hope. The photos showed a different version of our story, one where love was central, where my worth was never questioned, where being a mother was the most important job in the world. It's beautiful, I whispered. Will you wear it tonight? I handed him the locket, then turned so he could fasten the chain around my neck. His fingers trembled as he worked the clasp, and I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. Thank you, I said, turning back to face him. Thank you, he replied, for not giving up on me completely, for showing me what real strength looks like, for being exactly the mother I needed, even when I was too stupid to appreciate it. The evening wound down slowly with final toasts and promises of continued support, with business cards exchanged and future meetings scheduled. As the ballroom emptied, I found myself standing with Marcus and Nolan, watching the staff clear away the evidence of our triumph. What now? Marcus asked, slipping his arm around my waist. I looked around the ballroom one more time, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been a woman convinced of her own worthlessness, resigned to a life of diminishing expectations and casual cruelty. Tonight, I was surrounded by evidence of impact and possibility, flanked by a man who loved me and a son who was learning to see my true value. Now, I said, feeling the locket warm against my skin, we go home, and tomorrow we change more lives. As we walked toward the exit, I caught my reflection in the ballroom's mirrored walls. The woman looking back at me was elegant, confident, radiant, with purpose and joy. She looked like someone who mattered, like someone who had always mattered, but had simply needed the right moment to remember. I smiled at my reflection and kept walking, ready for whatever came next. After 64 years, my life had finally begun. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.